Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of the Ozark Mountains. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. In the autumn of 1864, as the Civil War tore through the nation, another kind of darkness descended upon a remote valley in the Ozark Mountains. The documented events concerning the Walker sisters remain one of the most disturbing chapters in regional history, though you won't find it in conventional history books. What occurred at Hollow Creek has been deliberately omitted from official records, preserved only through scattered documents, forgotten testimonies, and the reluctant whispers of those whose ancestors witnessed the horror firsthand. The Walker homestead stood at the end of a winding dirt path 3 miles from the nearest settlement of Thornfield. The property had been purchased by Matthias Walker in 1851, who brought his 2 sisters, Abigail and Ruth, to live in what was promised to be a land of opportunity. According to county land records, the purchase included nearly 200 acres of densely wooded land, a modest farmhouse constructed by the previous owner, and what was described in the deed as various natural features including a spring-fed creek and limestone formations. This last entry would later prove significant in ways no one could have anticipated. The sisters, unmarried and in their 30s, were known locally for their skill with herbal remedies and their tendency to keep to themselves. According to county records, they rarely ventured into town except for absolute necessities, and when they did, conversation was minimal and strictly practical. Several accounts from townsfolk describe the Walker sisters as peculiar but not unfriendly, with Abigail being the more talkative of the pair. Ruth, by contrast, was noted for her intense gaze that, as one shopkeeper wrote in his ledger margins, seemed to look through you rather than at you. A thorough examination of church attendance logs from the Thornfield Methodist congregation shows the Walker sisters attended services regularly for the first year of their residence. Their names then disappear from the records entirely. When questioned by Reverend Harrison Prescott about their absence, Matthias reportedly explained that his sisters had taken to practicing their faith privately at home. The Reverend noted in his personal journal, dated October 1852, that he found this explanation unsatisfactory, yet not worth pursuing further, as the family has always conducted themselves with propriety. What is less widely known is that Prescott made a single visit to the Walker homestead in November of 1852, ostensibly to deliver church pamphlets, but more likely to investigate the sisters' absence from his congregation. His journal entry from November 12th describes an unsettling experience. The house was immaculate, almost unnaturally so, not a speck of dust nor a thing out of place. The sisters received me with formal politeness, but no warmth. Most curious was the absence of any religious items in the home. No Bible was visible, no cross adorned the walls. When I inquired after their spiritual practices, Abigail replied that they had found a deeper communion in the natural world. I left feeling distinctly unwelcome and troubled by something I cannot quite articulate. What is known with certainty is that by 1860, the Walker sisters had established a modest business providing herbal remedies to locals. Several ledgers recovered from the general store show regular purchases of supplies, glass bottles, beeswax, alcohol for tinctures, and unusual quantities of salt. The merchant Obadiah Jenkins noted in his personal correspondence that the sisters' requirements for salt exceeded what would be needed for food preservation or normal medicinal purposes. When he inquired about this, Abigail reportedly smiled and said only that some things require binding. The sisters sold their remedies through Matias, who would bring the carefully labeled bottles into town. According to multiple accounts, these medicines were surprisingly effective, particularly for ailments that had confounded the region's only doctor, Frederick Mills. Records indicate that by 1862, people from neighboring communities were traveling considerable distances to purchase the Walker remedies, particularly a tonic for female complaints, and a salve that reportedly healed infected wounds overnight and without scarring. Dr. Mills's medical journal, preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, contains a curious entry from April 1862. The Walker women's tincture succeeded where my treatments failed. Mrs. Holloway's persistent fever broke within hours of consuming their preparation. I have requested the formula repeatedly, but Mr. Walker insists it is a family secret. There is something deeply unsettling about remedies that work so effectively, yet remain shrouded in such secrecy. A lesser-known entry in Mill's journal, dated 2 months later, recounts his examination of Samuel Thornton, a farmer who had been using a Walker ointment for arthritis. Thornton's pain has indeed subsided, but I observed unusual discoloration beneath his fingernails where he applies the substance. When questioned, he mentioned experiencing vivid dreams of crawling beneath the earth. I have advised him to discontinue use of the preparation, though he seems reluctant to do so, claiming the relief it provides outweighs any strange effects. The first indication that something was amiss at the Walker property came in the winter of 1863. Silas Tanner, a trapper who occasionally ventured near their land, reported hearing unnatural sounds coming from the direction of their home. In his statement to the county sheriff, documented on December 18, 1863, Tanner described a wailing that weren't human nor animal, but something caught between the two. The sheriff dismissed the account, attributing it to the wind or perhaps a mountain lion, both common in the Ozark wilderness. What the official report omits is Tanner's description of finding unusual tracks in the snow near the Walker property line. In a letter to his brother in Tennessee, Tanner wrote, "These weren't the prints of any creature I've encountered in 40 years of trapping. They resembled a woman's footprint in size, but the shape was all wrong, too narrow at the heel, too splayed at what should have been toes. Most disturbing was how they suddenly stopped, as if whatever made them had simply vanished, or perhaps taken to the trees, though no branches were low enough to reach." A month later, Wilhelmina Crawford, the postmistress at Thornfield, noted a strange change in Matthias Walker. In correspondence to her sister in St. Louis, she wrote, "Mr. Walker appears dramatically altered. He has lost considerable weight, and his eyes bear the vacant stare of a man who has witnessed something his mind cannot reconcile." When I inquired after his health, he muttered something about his sisters working toward their purpose, and departed in haste. I fear isolation has begun to affect the family's constitution. Crawford's letter continues with an observation that has been largely overlooked by those investigating the case. Most peculiar was Mr. Walker's hand when he reached for his mail. The fingers seemed longer than I recalled, and the joints bent at odd angles. When I mentioned how cold the weather had been, he replied that cold is merely a state of mind once you understand the deeper principles. I found this statement nonsensical and somewhat disturbing. The winter of 1863-1864 was particularly harsh in the Ozarks. Heavy snowfall isolated many homesteads for weeks. When Matthias Walker failed to appear in town for nearly 2 months, no particular concern was raised. It was assumed the family was simply waiting out the winter, as many others did. This assumption proved tragically misguided. Court records from Springfield mention a curious incident in February 1864. A traveling salesman, whose name is recorded only as J. Morris, reported to local authorities that he had sought shelter at the Walker homestead during a snowstorm. His statement indicates he was given food and allowed to sleep in a chair by the fire, but was expressly forbidden from venturing into certain parts of the house. During the night, he claimed to have heard rhythmic chanting from what he believed was a cellar or lower level of the home. Most disturbing was his account of seeing Ruth Walker moving across the ceiling like a spider when he opened his eyes briefly. Authorities dismissed his statement as the hallucination of an exhausted and possibly intoxicated traveler. On March 15, 1864, Jeremiah Blackwell, a hunter searching for game, stumbled upon Matthias Walker wandering in the forest nearly 5 miles from his home. According to Blackwell's sworn statement, Walker was severely emaciated, dressed only in nightclothes despite the bitter cold, and appeared to be in a state of profound distress. When Blackwell approached him, Walker reportedly began to scream, "They're changing! They've found a way to change!" before collapsing. What Blackwell omitted from his official statement, but later confided to his wife, according to their grandson's written memoir, was that Walker's nightclothes were stained with a substance that wasn't blood exactly, but something darker that seemed to move slightly even after the man was still. Blackwell also reported that Walker's feet had no frostbite despite his prolonged exposure to freezing conditions and lack of proper footwear, a medical impossibility that troubled him deeply. Blackwell brought the delirious man to town, where Dr. Mills attempted to treat his condition. Mills's notes describe severe malnutrition, exposure, and what he termed acute psychological disturbance. More troubling were his observations about Walker's physical condition. The patient exhibits unusual elasticity of the skin and an abnormal flexibility of the joints. When semi-conscious, he often contorts his body into positions that should be anatomically impossible. Most concerning is the gradual discoloration spreading from his extremities, a grayish cast that does not resemble any medical condition within my experience. Matias Walker died 3 days later without regaining lucidity. His final coherent words, as recorded by Mills, were, "My sisters are not what they appear to be. They've been consuming something they found in the cave beneath our property. They made me drink it too." Lewis mentions findings that defy medical understanding. He described Walker's internal organs as partially dissolved, as if by some unknown digestive process originating within the body, rather than from ingested substances. Most alarming was his observation that several major bones showed signs of becoming porous and partially hollow, yet retained their structural integrity. Mills concluded his letter by stating his intention to preserve several tissue samples for further study. Though no record of these specimens exists today, I can feel myself becoming hollow inside. An autopsy was apparently performed, though the official records have been lost. However, a private letter from Dr. Mills to a medical colleague in St. the Sheriff organized a party of 5 men to investigate the Walker homestead. What they discovered there has been pieced together from their individual accounts, official reports, and private correspondence that emerged years later. The documents present a disturbing picture that defies conventional explanation. The Walker home appeared to have been abandoned for some time. A thin layer of dust covered most surfaces, and the kitchen showed signs of neglect. The most unsettling discovery was in the sisters' shared bedroom. According to the official report filed by Sheriff Coleman, they found an unusual arrangement of furniture. The beds had been pushed to the walls, and in the center of the room stood a table bearing numerous glass jars containing what appeared to be preserved specimens. The nature of these specimens was not elaborated upon in the official documentation. However, in a private letter to his brother in Kentucky, Deputy William Hargrove was more explicit. The jars contained what looked to be organs, though misshapen and discolored. Some appeared almost transformed into something else entirely. One jar held what I initially took to be a heart, but upon closer inspection, it seemed to have developed additional chambers and vessels, unlike any natural anatomy. I have been a deputy for 12 years and served in the Mexican War, yet I have never witnessed anything that disturbed me so profoundly. What Hargrove's letter does not mention, but was later revealed in his personal journal discovered after his death in 1876, was the discovery of unusual markings carved into the floorboards beneath a rug in the sisters' room. He described them as resembling mathematical equations, but incorporating symbols I have never encountered in any known language or scientific text. Even more disturbing was his observation that the carvings seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles, creating what he described as a nauseating sensation of movement despite being clearly etched into solid wood. The search party found no sign of the Walker sisters. Their clothing remained in wardrobes, and their personal items were undisturbed. It was as if they had simply vanished. The most significant finding, according to multiple accounts, was a journal belonging to Abigail Walker. This document, partially preserved in the Missouri State Archives, provides the only insight into what may have occurred in the months leading up to these events. The journal begins conventionally enough, with entries detailing household management and the sisters' herbal work. On July 12, 1863, Abigail mentions unusual limestone formations discovered on their property during a search for new herbs. By August, she describes finding a narrow fissure barely wide enough for a person to slip through that led to a system of chambers unlike anything we expected to find beneath our land. In September 1863, the entries take a dramatic turn. Abigail writes, "Ruth and I have made a remarkable discovery in the cave system beneath our property. There is a substance here, unlike anything we have encountered before. It resembles a kind of fungus, though it grows not on organic matter, but on specific formations of limestone. When added to our tinctures in minute quantities, it enhances their efficacy tremendously. We have begun experimenting with larger amounts." An entry from October 3rd reads, "The substance appears to respond to sound in the most extraordinary manner. When Ruth sang her old Welsh lullaby near our largest sample, the material visibly pulsated and seemed to produce a resonance of its own, not an echo, but a response." We have begun documenting these reactions systematically. By late October, the journal describes a disturbing development. We have observed that prolonged handling of the substance leaves a residue that the skin absorbs. Ruth has developed unusual sensitivity in her fingertips. She can now perceive vibrations through solid objects that I cannot detect. Matthias disapproves of our continued work with the material, but he cannot deny the potential it represents. By November, the entries become increasingly disturbing. The substance appears to have properties beyond mere medicine. Ruth noticed changes in her reflection today. I observed them too, a subtle alteration in the structure of her face, particularly around the eyes and jaw. The skeletal framework seems to have become more adaptable. We have begun consuming the substance directly, without dilution. Matthias disapproves, but he doesn't understand the significance of what we found. An entry from December 9th describes a troubling incident. Matthias discovered Ruth in what he called an unnatural state last night. She had contorted her body in ways that admittedly appeared disturbing to someone who doesn't understand the transformation. He threatened to burn our entire supply of the substance. We attempted to explain the importance of our work, but his mind is too conventional to grasp what we are becoming. The substance doesn't just heal, it evolves. The final entry, dated January 7, 1864, reads, "We are becoming something new. The transformation is painful but necessary. Matthias threatened to destroy our supply. We have confined him to the root cellar for his own protection. He will understand once we have completed the process." Ruth's voice has changed entirely. It no longer sounds human. I expect mine will follow soon. We are approaching the final stage. A smudged postscript, nearly illegible, but confirmed by handwriting experts to be an Abigail script, adds, "The cave calls to us now. We must complete the metamorphosis where it began." The search party located the entrance to the cave mentioned in Abigail's journal. According to Sheriff Coleman's report, they found a narrow opening in a limestone outcropping approximately 400 yards behind the Walker home. The entrance had been concealed by strategically placed brush that appeared to have been recently disturbed. Coleman's report indicates they ventured approximately 50 feet into the narrow passage before encountering a chamber containing evidence of recent human activity. The report becomes notably vague at this point, stating only that they found items of concern and decided to seal the cave entrance with dynamite. Deputy Hargrove's letter, however, provides more detail. The chamber walls were covered with markings, not any language I recognized, but deliberate patterns scratched into the stone. In the center was a shallow pool of liquid that seemed to move of its own accord, even without any breeze in that stagnant place. The fluid was neither water nor oil, but something between the two with an iridescent quality that created disorienting patterns when our lantern light struck it, as if the wearers had grown too large for them. What Hargrove omitted from this letter, but confided to his journal, was the discovery of a peculiar residue coating several surfaces in the chamber, a translucent film that, when touched accidentally, caused a momentary numbness, followed by a sensation of internal vibration that persisted for hours afterward. He also described hearing what sounded like distant voices engaged in conversation, though no words could be distinguished, and the acoustics of the cave made it impossible to determine the direction from which the sounds originated. Most disturbing was his account of the pool's behavior. As we prepared to leave the chamber, the liquid in the pool began to form distinct shapes, patterns that momentarily resembled human faces before dissolving again. Beside it lay clothing that appeared to have been shed or discarded. The garments were torn, as if removed in haste, or I am certain I glimpsed a countenance resembling Abigail Walker, though distorted in ways I cannot adequately describe. Sheriff Coleman saw it too, which is why he ordered the immediate evacuation and subsequent demolition of the entrance. The official narrative concluded that the Walker sisters had likely perished, either from exposure after wandering into the wilderness or through some accident in the cave system before it was sealed. Their disappearance was attributed to the mental decline evidenced in Abigail's journal, perhaps caused by accidental poisoning from their own experimental remedies. The case was formally closed on April 30th, 1864. This might have been the end of the story had it not been for a series of unusual incidents in the decades that followed. In the summer of 1866, a local farmer named Ezekiel Harding reported crops failing in a particular section of his land adjacent to the former Walker property. According to his statement to agricultural authorities, the affected area formed a perfect circle approximately 30 feet in diameter, within which plants would grow rapidly but produce inedible, misshapen fruits and vegetables. Soil samples reportedly showed no known contaminants, and the phenomenon persisted for 3 growing seasons before gradually disappearing. In 1871, another farmer reported seeing 2 women standing at the edge of his property near dusk. According to his account, preserved in the journal of Reverend Prescott's successor, their proportions seemed wrong somehow, too tall and too fluid in their movements, and when he called out to them, they retreated into the forest with a movement he described as fluid, like water flowing uphill. The location was less than a mile from the former Walker property. The farmer noted that after this encounter, he experienced vivid nightmares for weeks, all featuring women who could fold themselves into impossible shapes. Between 1875 and 1886, 7 separate incidents were documented, involving livestock found dead near the sealed cave entrance. According to witnesses, the animals showed no visible wounds, yet their bodies appeared deflated, as if something had removed their internal organs without breaking the skin. More disturbing was the consistent report that the eyes of these animals had turned a milky white color, and, according to a veterinary examination conducted in 1880, appeared to have partially dissolved within the socket. In 1878, a hunting party reported finding unusual tracks in a muddy area near Hollow Creek. The tracks resembled elongated human footprints, but with what appeared to be additional appendages extending from the sides. When they attempted to follow the trail, it led them to a limestone bluff, where the tracks simply ended, as if whatever made them had scaled a sheer vertical surface. In 1883, a local child went missing for 3 days near the former Walker property. When found wandering near the road to Thornfield, the girl claimed to have been kept safe by the long ladies who live under the rocks. According to the newspaper account, she described women who could stretch like taffy, and had extra bending places in their arms and legs. Doctors attributed her story to dehydration and the vivid imagination of a frightened child, though they could not explain the peculiar gray residue found on her clothing, which reportedly could not be removed through washing. In 1892, a geology expedition from the University of Missouri sought permission to unseal and explore the cave system for scientific purposes. Their request was vehemently opposed by local residents and ultimately denied by county officials. Professor James Harlow, who led the proposed expedition, noted in his correspondence, "The locals display an irrational fear regarding this particular cave. When pressed for explanations, they refer only to the Walker women and refuse to elaborate further. One elderly gentleman told me, 'Some things are sealed away for good reason,' and suggested I focus my research elsewhere if I valued my sanity." What is less widely known is that Harlow conducted an unofficial survey of the area with 2 graduate students later that same year. According to his private journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1905, they identified what appeared to be a secondary entrance to the cave system approximately a mile from the sealed main entrance. Harlow's journal describes their exploration of a narrow passage that eventually connected to a larger chamber. The acoustics in this space are unlike anything I have encountered in 20 years of geological fieldwork. Whispers seem to amplify and distort, while louder sounds are somehow muted. Most curious was our discovery of unusual crystalline formations that appear to have grown in patterns too regular to be natural, almost as if cultivated deliberately. Harlow's final entry regarding this exploration is abrupt and troubling. Jenkins observed something moving in the darkness beyond our lantern light. He described it as elongated and fluid, though it retreated too quickly for proper identification. Shortly thereafter, we all experienced a sudden sensation of being watched that was so intense we made the unanimous decision to abandon our exploration. Upon exiting, I noticed an unusual residue on my boots that seemed to evaporate within minutes, leaving a faint discoloration on the leather. We agreed to seal this entrance with available rocks and soil and to speak no more of what we encountered. In 1897, a photographer from St. Louis traveled to the region to document Ozark landscapes. Among his collected works, preserved in the Missouri Historical Society, is a peculiar image labeled simply Hollow Creek Dawn. The photograph shows a misty morning landscape with what appears to be a tall, slender figure, partially obscured by fog in the background. When magnified, the figure seems disproportionately elongated and standing at an odd angle. The photographer's notes make no mention of this figure, suggesting he did not notice it when taking the picture. The most detailed account emerged in 1912, nearly 50 years after the original events. Marion Thompson, an elderly resident of Thornfield, provided a written testimony shortly before her death. As the daughter of one of the original search party members, she claimed her father had shared the true story with her on his deathbed in 1899. According to Thompson's account, the search party had indeed found evidence of the Walker sisters in the cave, but what they discovered was so disturbing that they agreed never to speak of it officially. Her father described finding a chamber deep in the cave system where the walls were slick with some kind of secretion that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the lantern light. In this chamber, they allegedly discovered items they recognized as belonging to the Walker sisters: hairbrushes containing long strands of women's hair, a distinctive brooch known to have belonged to Abigail, and scraps of clothing. Most disturbingly, Thompson's account claims the men found a sort of nest constructed from mud, twigs, and what appeared to be human hair. Within this structure were objects her father described as eggs or cocoons, approximately the size of watermelons. One had been broken open and was empty. The other remained intact. When one of the men suggested breaking it open, her father and Sheriff Coleman adamantly refused. Thompson wrote, "My father told me they fled the cave immediately. The sheriff ordered dynamite brought from the mining operation near Springfield, and they collapsed the entrance that same day. Before they left, my father swore he heard something moving deeper in the cave, a sound like wet cloth being dragged across stone. The men made a pact never to reveal what they had seen, fearing no one would believe them, and that public knowledge might encourage the curious to explore the area. What Thompson's account does not include, but was found in a separate letter, discovered among her personal effects after her death, was her father's description of events following the cave's sealing. For weeks afterward, I would wake in the night, believing I had heard Abigail Walker's voice calling my name from just outside the window. More than once I thought I saw a tall, slender figure at the edge of our property, though it would vanish when I tried to look directly at it. Most troubling were the dreams, vivid visions in which I found myself crawling through narrow stone passages toward some vast underground chamber where something waited that was neither human nor animal, but somehow both and neither simultaneously. In 1922, a folklorist collecting Ozark legends documented a local superstition that had apparently developed in communities surrounding the former Walker property. According to his notes, residents believed that speaking the Walker sisters' names after sunset might summon elongated figures that would be visible only from the corner of one's eye. Children in the area played a dare game involving counting to 13 while facing the direction of Hollow Creek, a practice their parents strongly discouraged. In 1937, during the construction of a new county road, workers uncovered the sealed entrance to the cave. Before authorities could respond, 2 young men from the construction crew reportedly entered the passage out of curiosity. According to their co-workers, they emerged less than 10 minutes later, pale and visibly shaken. One reportedly said, "They're still down there," before both men refused to speak further on the matter. Both men resigned from their positions that day and left the region entirely. One reportedly relocated to California, while the other's whereabouts remained unknown. The cave was resealed immediately, and the road route was altered to avoid the area. A curious footnote to this incident appears in the medical records of Springfield General Hospital. 3 days after the cave entrance was discovered, one of the construction workers who had not entered the cave but had been present when it was uncovered was admitted with unusual symptoms. The attending physician described extreme flexibility of the joints, particularly in the fingers, which the patient could bend backward to touch the wrist without apparent pain or discomfort. The patient also reported vivid dreams of women speaking in mathematical equations and the sensation of something moving beneath his skin. He was discharged after symptoms subsided, with no diagnosis established. In 1945, a hunting dog belonging to a local resident disappeared near Hollow Creek. When it returned 3 days later, its behavior had changed dramatically. According to a letter written by its owner to a veterinarian in Springfield, the dog refused to bark, avoided other animals, and would stand on its hind legs for hours, staring in the direction of the old Walker property. Most disturbing was the owner's observation that the dog's joints seemed to have developed additional articulation points, allowing for movements that should have been anatomically impossible. The dog eventually ran away and was never found. Jenkins, a respected member of the community not known for exaggeration, provided a sworn statement to the county sheriff describing beings that appeared human-like from a distance, but moved in a manner he described as boneless. When he raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to use the scope for a better view, the figures reportedly retreated into a thicket with impossible speed. What Jenkins initially omitted from his report, but later confided to his pastor, was that one of the figures had turned to look directly at him before disappearing. The final documented incident connected to the Walker case occurred in 1957. Hiram Jenkins, a local hunter, reported encountering 2 female figures in a remote wooded area near the original Walker property. He described a face that was almost human, but stretched somehow, with eyes spaced too far apart and a jaw that seemed to contain too many joints. Most disturbing was his claim that the figure had spoken his name, despite there being no reasonable way for a stranger to have known his identity. The sheriff's investigation found unusual indentations in the soil where Jenkins claimed to have seen the figures. Plaster casts were made of these impressions, but the results were deemed inconclusive and subsequently lost when the sheriff's office relocated in 1962. What the official report does not mention is that the deputy who made the casts reportedly developed an unusual rash on his hands that spread gradually up his arms before disappearing approximately 2 weeks later. Attempts to investigate the Walker case more thoroughly have been consistently hindered by missing records, reluctant witnesses, and what some researchers have described as institutional resistance. When historian Margaret Simmons attempted to locate Abigail Walker's journal for her 1968 study of frontier women in the Ozarks, she was informed the document had been misplaced during archival reorganization. Similarly, the original reports filed by Sheriff Coleman and his deputies have disappeared from county records. In 1951, author Daniel Morrison spent 6 months researching the Walker case for a planned book on unsolved mysteries of the Ozarks. According to his correspondence with his publisher, he had compiled substantial documentation and conducted interviews with several elderly residents who claimed familial connections to witnesses of the original events. 3 weeks before his manuscript was due, Morrison abruptly abandoned the project. In a brief letter to his editor, he wrote only, "Some stories are not meant to be told. I will not be continuing this research and have destroyed my notes." Morrison never published again and reportedly refused to discuss the Walker case for the remainder of his life. The land where the Walker homestead once stood remains uninhabited to this day. Local real estate records show the property has changed hands multiple times, but no development has ever been attempted. A survey conducted in 1972 for a potential forestry project noted unusual soil composition and persistent temperature anomalies in the vicinity of where the house once stood. The current owner, a timber company based in Oregon, has designated the area as a natural preserve closed to public access, though no reason for this classification is provided in publicly available documents. Residents of communities near the former Walker property maintain an unusual silence about the location. When questioned by outsiders, they typically claim ignorance or change the subject. Some researchers have suggested this represents a cultural memory of traumatic events passed down through generations without explicit acknowledgement. Dr. Evelyn Mortimer, a folklorist who studied Ozark traditions in the mid-1960s, noted that locals still occasionally use the phrase "going to visit the Walker sisters" as a euphemism for dangerous or irrational behavior. In her field notes, Mortimer wrote, "The story has transformed into a cautionary tale without anyone explicitly telling it. The specifics have been lost, but the warning remains." Perhaps most telling is a local prohibition against harvesting certain mushrooms that grow near limestone outcroppings. When Mortimer inquired about this practice, an elderly resident reportedly told her, "Some things look like food but feed something else entirely." The Walker women learned that too late. In 1964, exactly 100 years after the disappearance of the Walker sisters, geology professor Raymond Matthews conducted soil samples from the vicinity of the sealed cave entrance as part of an environmental study. His analysis revealed unusual chemical compounds that he could not immediately identify. His notes describe a substance that appears organic in origin, but contains molecular structures inconsistent with any known biological material. Before he could complete more thorough testing, his laboratory at Washington University suffered a fire that destroyed his samples and research notes. The investigation determined the cause was an electrical fault. Matthews did not resume his research in the area. In a private letter to a colleague discovered after Matthews' death in 1979, he confided, "I am convinced that what we found near Hollow Creek represents an entirely unknown biological agent, perhaps a fungal organism with properties unlike anything in the current scientific literature." Most remarkable was its behavior in solution, where it demonstrated what almost appeared to be responsive movements to sound and light. I have requested permission to return to the site for additional samples, but have been denied without explanation. There seems to be an institutional reluctance to investigate this phenomenon that I cannot comprehend. In the autumn of 1965, 3 university students camping in the Ozarks reportedly ventured near the former Walker property despite warnings from locals. According to the subsequent sheriff's report, one student became separated from the group for approximately 2 hours. When found by his companions, he was disoriented and claimed to have met 2 women who could fold their limbs in impossible ways. All 3 students left the area immediately. The student who had been separated reportedly transferred to another university the following semester and refused to discuss the incident further. What actually happened to Abigail and Ruth Walker remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in Ozark history. Were they victims of their own experimentation with unknown substances? Did they suffer from a shared delusion that led to their disappearance? Or, as some have reluctantly suggested, did they actually undergo some kind of transformation that defies conventional understanding? The most rational explanation, proposed by several historians, suggests the sisters discovered a naturally occurring hallucinogenic substance in the cave system, perhaps a fungus or mineral compound, that caused severe psychological effects. Under its influence, they may have wandered into the wilderness and perished from exposure. This theory, however, fails to account for the numerous sightings reported over subsequent decades, or the physical evidence documented by multiple reliable sources. Others have suggested the entire affair was fabricated or greatly exaggerated, perhaps to disguise a more mundane crime or to serve as a cautionary tale about women living independently in a frontier society. Yet the consistency of documentation from multiple sources, many of which remained private for decades, argues against a coordinated deception. Furthermore, the physical evidence, from soil samples to plaster casts, suggests phenomena that cannot be easily dismissed. A third theory, proposed by anthropologist Dr. Samuel Winters in a controversial 1966 paper, suggests the Walker sisters may have discovered a substance that triggered extreme physical and psychological changes, perhaps a compound that affected cellular structures in ways that 19th century science could not comprehend. Winters speculated that the sisters may have survived their transformation in some form but became so altered that they could no longer interact with human society in conventional ways. His paper was rejected by mainstream academic publications and exists only in university archives. Whatever the truth, the case of the Walker sisters represents a disturbing chapter in regional history, one that official records have seemingly attempted to erase. The sealed cave, the abandoned property, and the persistent local taboo surrounding the story all suggest something occurred that defied explanation within the conventional framework of 19th century rural America. In 1968, journalist Howard Keller attempted to publish an extensive investigation into the Walker case. His editor at the Springfield Daily News reportedly refused to run the story, citing concerns about journalistic standards and community sensitivities. Keller's manuscript, which allegedly included interviews with descendants of the original Search Party members, disappeared from his office shortly thereafter. Keller himself accepted a position at a newspaper in Washington state and never returned to the Ozarks. In a letter to a former colleague discovered during research for a journalism retrospective in 1990, Keller wrote, "I have never encountered such systematic resistance to uncovering historical facts. It's as if an unspoken agreement exists among various institutions to keep the Walker case buried." Most telling was my interview with James Hargrove, grandson of Deputy William Hargrove, who showed me a small box of unusual crystalline formations his grandfather had apparently removed from the cave in 1864. When I asked to photograph these items, he became agitated and asked me to leave. The next day, He denied ever showing me the box or discussing his grandfather's involvement in the case. The most troubling aspect of the Walker sisters' case is perhaps not what is known, but what remains hidden. The deliberate sealing of the cave, the disappearance of key documents, and the reluctance of locals to discuss the matter all suggest a concerted effort to suppress information. This pattern of institutional silence raises disturbing questions about what might have been discovered in that remote Ozark Valley and whether it remains there still, hidden beneath layers of soil, stone, and deliberate forgetfulness. Those familiar with the topography of the Ozarks know that cave systems rarely exist in isolation. What was sealed in 1864 may have merely been one entrance to a more extensive underground network. The possibility that another access point exists somewhere in the densely forested region cannot be dismissed. In 1971, a speleological survey conducted by the U.S. Geological Survey noted numerous unexplored cave systems in the vicinity of Hollow Creek. The report mentions unusual acoustic properties have been detected in Section 12, suggesting the presence of large, open subterranean chambers. However, no suitable entrance points were identified. The report recommends further investigation but includes a curious addendum. Local resistance to exploration in this area should be taken into consideration when planning future surveys. The most recent geological data, compiled in a 1982 survey, indicates that the limestone formations in the region are particularly susceptible to water erosion, creating extensive underground passages over time. The survey notes anomalous temperature readings in several locations near the former Walker property, but offers no explanation for these findings. A proposed follow-up study was apparently never conducted. The last official mention of the Walker case appeared in a 1969 geological survey that marked the approximate location of the sealed cave as unsuitable for development due to unstable subterranean conditions. No further details were provided, and subsequent surveys omit the notation entirely. The story of the Walker sisters serves as a reminder of how history can be selectively preserved or deliberately obscured. What remains are fragments, documents, testimonies, and lingering fears that point towards something beyond ordinary understanding. In the absence of complete information, the human mind inevitably attempts to construct a coherent narrative, often overlooking the possibility that some truths may be too disturbing to integrate into our conventional worldview. For those who venture into the remote valleys of the Ozarks today, the legacy of Abigail and Ruth Walker persists as an unspoken warning. Local guides still avoid certain areas without explanation. Hunters report an unnatural silence in the vicinity of the former Walker property, an absence of the wildlife that typically inhabits the region. In 1973, a Forest Service employee conducting a wildlife census noted in his report, "Area surrounding Hollow Creek shows significantly reduced animal population compared to similar habitats nearby. No evidence of pollution or other environmental factors that would explain this anomaly." His recommendation for further study was apparently never implemented. The most recent documented incident possibly connected to the Walker case occurred in the spring of 1967. A university student conducting botanical research in the area reported finding unusual markings on tree trunks near the supposed location of the sealed cave. The markings, which she photographed and later described as resembling fluid mathematical equations, had reportedly been carved into the bark recently, as they showed minimal weathering. When she returned the following day with a professor to examine the site more thoroughly, the marked trees had been cut down and removed. No explanation was ever provided, and her photographs were reportedly lost during processing. In 1979, an amateur historian named Robert Thorne attempted to locate the exact site of the Walker homestead using county land records. According to his journal, published posthumously by his daughter in 1994, he identified what he believed to be the foundation stones of the original structure. His notes describe finding an unusual growth on several of the stones, a translucent, film-like organism that adhered tenaciously to the limestone but could be removed with sufficient force. Thorne collected samples, but they reportedly desiccated and crumbled to dust within hours of removal from the site. Most intriguing was Thorne's description of an incident that occurred during his second visit to the site. As dusk approached, I became aware of what appeared to be two figures observing me from the edge of the clearing. They remained perfectly still, and their height, well above 6 feet, made me initially mistake them for slender trees. When I called out, they retreated into the forest with a fluid motion, unlike normal human movement. I am not given to flights of fancy, but I cannot explain this observation in conventional terms. As with many historical mysteries, the full truth of what occurred at the Walker homestead in 1864 may never be known. What distinguishes this case from mere local legend is the substantial documentary evidence indicating that something unprecedented transpired, something that authorities at multiple levels deemed necessary to conceal from public knowledge. The reluctance to investigate, the missing records, and the persistent local avoidance of the area all suggest a collective decision that some truths are better left buried. Whether this represents wisdom or a failure of courage remains an open question. What seems certain is that the events surrounding Abigail and Ruth Walker left an indelible mark on the consciousness of the region, a wound in the historical record that has never properly healed. For those inclined to dismiss the story as frontier superstition or exaggerated folklore, consider the words attributed to William Hargrove in his final letter to his brother before his death in 1876. There are things in this world that defy categorization, phenomena that exist at the boundaries of our understanding. What we witnessed in that cave was one such thing. I do not speak of it not because it didn't happen, but because I fear acknowledging it might somehow strengthen its hold on reality. Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that Abigail Walker's journal documented a genuine discovery, a substance with properties beyond 19th century science's ability to comprehend. If so, the sister's fate may represent not a tragedy, but a deliberate transformation, the nature and purpose of which remain unknowable. In 1983, a hydrological study of groundwater patterns in the Ozarks noted unusual chemical compositions in samples taken from springs near Hollow Creek. The report describes compounds not consistent with known geological processes in the region, but offers no explanation for their presence. The study recommended additional testing, but no follow-up reports appear in public records. In 1991, during the construction of a cell phone tower approximately 3 miles from the former Walker property, workers reportedly discovered an unusual cavity in the bedrock. According to an account published in a local newspaper, the cavity contained fossilized remains that defied immediate classification. A university paleontologist was supposedly consulted, but if any formal report was filed, it has not been made publicly available. The cavity was reportedly filled with concrete before construction continued. The legacy of the Walker sisters endures in the collective memory of the Ozarks, not as explicit history, but as an absence, a silence, a place where questions go unanswered. For those who know where to look, their story remains visible in property records that show uninhabited land, in geological surveys that avoid certain areas, and in the persistent reluctance of locals to venture near the site of their former home after dusk. In the end, the most frightening aspect of the Walker sisters' story may be its implication that our understanding of reality remains incomplete, that beneath the familiar surface of the world lie possibilities that defy conventional explanation. Some boundaries, once crossed, permit no return to former certainties. As this account draws to a close, one final document deserves mention. In 1965, a maintenance worker at the Missouri State Archives discovered a sealed envelope while cleaning a rarely used storage room. Inside was a single page, apparently torn from Abigail Walker's journal, but never filed with the main document. The text, verified by handwriting experts as matching Abigail's known script, contained just 3 sentences. We remain ourselves in essence, if not in form. The substance reveals rather than changes. We will wait as long as necessary. The page was reportedly forwarded to the appropriate department for inclusion with the original journal, but no record of its receipt exists. Like so much evidence related to the Walker case, it has vanished into the institutional silence that continues to shroud this disturbing chapter in Ozark history. In 2008, a hiking trail was proposed that would have passed within a mile of the former Walker property. Despite favorable environmental impact studies and potential economic benefits, the project was abandoned after what local newspapers described as unexpected opposition from multiple agencies. No official explanation was provided for the decision. For those who find themselves in the remote valleys of the Ozark Mountains, particularly near the borders of what was once Matias Walker's property, locals still offer the same advice they have given for generations: leave before sunset. Don't listen too carefully to sounds in the forest, and never, under any circumstances, explore cave openings, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant they appear. The truth about the Walker sisters remains buried, not just beneath rock and soil, but beneath layers of official denial, missing documents, and institutional forgetfulness. Yet something of their presence lingers in the hushed conversations of local residents, in the unexplained phenomena reported by visitors to the region, and in the persistent avoidance of certain areas by those who know the land best. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Perhaps some truths are too disturbing to integrate into our understanding of the world. The case of the Walker sisters stands as a testament to the limits of historical investigation, a reminder that not all questions lead to answers we are prepared to accept. The substance they discovered remains unidentified. The transformation they described remains unexplained. The fate they embraced or suffered remains unknown. All that is certain is that in 1864, 2 women vanished from their home in the Ozark Mountains, leaving behind evidence of something beyond ordinary understanding. What that evidence represents, delusion, crime, or something far stranger, is a question that continues to echo through the deep valleys and ancient forests of a region that has learned to keep its darkest secrets hidden from the light of conventional history. For those who seek answers about Abigail and Ruth Walker, perhaps the most telling response comes from the words reportedly carved above the fireplace in their long-demolished home. What appears to be is only the smallest portion of what is.